Hey folks, this is Dr. K, and in the last video we talked about creating a hover drop-down menu, and this is what we came up with here. And you can see that when I hover over the categories button, I get the menu, and I'm hovering over the menu, and it stays there, and it's only when I leave the menu that it disappears again. Okay, and when I hover over the individual list items, they are highlighted. Okay, so that's your basic hover drop-down menu, and I want to talk about how to make this menu transition, like it kind of rolls out from above. But before I do, I want to review some things about block elements and versus inline elements. So let me bring up a little slide. Let me bring up keynotes. So block elements always start on a new line. The typical block element is div. Okay, that's the canonical block element. They always start on a new line by default, and they occupy the full width available. And for block elements, you can set both width and height values. All right. So div is the typical one people kind of use by default if they don't have another one ready. But headers and paragraphs are also block elements. Lists and list items. So in our hover dropdown, we used an unordered list, and it was full of list items. And any kind of high-level layout elements like header, section, article. Okay, these HTML5 layout elements are going to be block level elements. All right. So that's block level elements. They always start on a new line, and you can adjust the width and height. So now let's talk about inline elements. Inline elements is going to be displayed on the same line as the text that surrounds it. All right. You cannot adjust the height or width of an inline element. It's always going to be relative to the text inside the element. Elements that are inline by default are span. That's the canonical one if you want something that's inline and you just need an element to use it. You'll just use span. Anchor tags are inline elements. Okay, if you put a link inside a text, you want it to be relative to the rest of the text. The thing is, and we're going to talk about this when it comes to our hover drop-down menu, but if an anchor tag is inside a list item, which is a block level element, you're probably going to want to make the anchor tag a block level element also, and I'll show you why that is. In fact, let me just show you why that is right now. Let's go to our hover drop-down menu. Okay, so we're hovering over these list items, right? And these are links. So these are links inside list items, and you can see the HTML here. These are list items, and then you have a link, an anchor tag inside the link. Well, watch what happens when I hover over these. You can see that because they are links, the arrow turns to a hand. Okay, so the pointer turns from an arrow, like it is here, to a hand when I hover over this because it's a link. But watch when I go here before this. It goes back to an arrow. And if I click on this, nothing will happen. It will not activate that link. Okay, and typically if I have something like this, I do want that link to be activated when I'm over here, and I want the the pointer to be a hand instead of an arrow when I'm over here. And I can fix that by changing the anchor tag from an inline element to a block level element. So let me go ahead and do that right now in the style section. Okay, so I've got I've got my anchor tag style right here. And I might not want to do this for all blanket for all anchor tags, because I might have another anchor tag inside some text. So I might have a link inside text, which I want to keep as inline. So I'm just going to say if the anchor tag is inside a list item, then, and in fact, I will just, make this true only of anchor tags inside of list items. So I want to say, usually display is the first property I like to define. It's already inline, so I just want to say display block. I'm going to save this, and now let's see if that changed anything here. So here it's a hand, but what about when I go here where this empty space? It's still a hand because that anchor tag is now taking up it's a block level element, so it's taking up the full width and height of the list item parent. Okay, so that's number one. So if you find that happening, there's a quick fix. Okay, let's go back to block elements versus inline elements. So we talked about the span. We talked about the anchor tag and why you want to probably make it a block element when it's a child of a list item. Image here is an inline element. And now the image tag actually lets you set a height and width in the image tag, but you can't, as far as I know, you can't change that later on. If you want full flexibility of setting the height and width in a different place, you may want to consider making the image a block level element. I know one thing. You may want to consider just making it a block level element so you have more control over the width and the height. And then formatting elements like I, strong, and small are all, so strong is bold, I is italics, or EM is sometimes used. That means emphasis. Small, that just makes the font size smaller. These are all, as you would expect, these are all inline elements. Okay. Let me think if there's anything else I want to say about this. Oh, keep in mind that by default, if you're using Font Awesome, it uses the I tag to put in the fonts, and that's an inline element. But you can technically use any inline element like span, but I is just fine, unless you're using it for something else. Okay, I think that's all I want to say right now. We might come back to this when we're messing with inline block elements. Sorry, I do want to talk about inline block elements. It's kind of a hybrid. It's displayed on the same line, just like the inline elements, as the text around it. However, you can adjust the height and the width of these elements. So usually, if you're looking at built-in CSS elements, they're either going to be block or they're going to be inline. But the button element is one that most browsers will display as an inline block. Okay, so most browsers will display this as something you can adjust the height and width of. Now, I would suggest just treating button as an inline element. Okay, and if you want to give it that classic button shape, that rectangle or rounded rectangle, then you can still do that with padding, and you can still set the border on elements, as indeed we did here. We removed the border from this element because, remember, when we didn't have a border property for this element, for this button element, it gave us that beveled button, which is not a good look. Okay, and we set padding 0.5 EM top and bottom and 1 EM on the right and left. Okay, So I think that's all I want to say about block elements, elements, and inline elements. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is position absolute. We mentioned this a little bit. Did I make these position absolute already for my menu? I might have made it then taken it away. So let's see. There's the menu container. Is the UL position absolute? Doesn't look like it. Okay, but let's go ahead and do that again. I did this a little bit in the last video, but let's go ahead and add. Let's go put back the border around the menu container. Okay, there it is, and then you can see that when I hover over that, actually the border, I'm not sure why the border is not showing up. Here, that's kind of interesting. All right, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, let's remind ourselves about position absolute then. Let me bring up the slides here. So position absolute, an element with position absolute is positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. If an absolute position element has no positioned ancestor, then it uses the document body. So if you know, if you're getting results you don't expect, see if it's positioning itself relative to the document as a whole. Absolute position elements are removed from the normal flow. That means they can overlap other elements. Okay. All right. So let's look at position absolute here. We've got the red border indicates the menu container. All right. And the menu panel is the list of links. So the list of links, I gave that a position of absolute. So that's going to be positioned relatively to its first position ancestor, which is the menu container. And you can see that I said, well, actually I had position absolute, and I said left is 0. So if we roll over this, you can see that it is aligned. The left side of the menu is aligned with the left side of the menu container. So that's what left 0 will do. If I change that to right, you'll get then the right side of the menu will align with the right side of the menu container. Okay, and if I do top, I think top and bottom work too. Okay, as it's not something you're going to want because that's going to, you know, that's going to cover up the button, so you wouldn't want that. But you can see that top 0 aligns the top edge of the absolute menu with the top edge of its relative ancestor. Okay, you can do the same with bottom, but obviously that's not something we want. So I'm going to just go ahead, and since I've got the categories button pushed over to the right, I'm going to just go ahead and change this back to right 0. And that's what I want. Okay. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try to put a simple animation on this menu. And the simplest animations you can do are called transitions. Okay. And a transition is like if I have a rectangle over here on the right side of my screen, and if I do something like hover over something or click something, I can make it transition. I can make it move to the left, or I can make something scale up, or I can make the opacity of something fade in or fade out. Now, what I want to do here is I want to make this menu look like it's rolling out of the top here. So, but here's the thing. I'm going between, when I'm hovering over this button, I'm going between this menu having a display of none, which it does now when I'm not hovering over the menu, to here when I'm hovering over the menu container, it has a display of block. Well, transitions only work with something on a linear scale like numbers or heights or width or something like that. They don't work with basically the transition between none and block is like basically a Boolean. There's only two values. So transition has to be a range for something that has a range of values like opacity or a height or a width or a position, okay, or a relative position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this menu a max height. And it's kind of a clever, I wouldn't say it's a trick, but I've seen it used quite often. I'm going to give this menu a max height of 0 when it's not supposed to be visible. And I'm going to give it a max height of 10 EM or something that is, something that is larger than its current height, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So where's the menu? The menu container, that's the whole thing. That's the thing that contains the button and the panel. So here is the menu itself. It's this unordered list, okay? This is the list of links. So I'm going to say, I already got the padding and stuff like this. I'm going to say max height of this is 0. And let me just look what happens. That shouldn't have changed anything, and it doesn't, okay? So max height of 0. And I'm going to give it a transition property. Okay, a transition, and for the transition, that takes multiple things. That takes a property, it takes a time. I'm just going to worry about that property and the time for now. So the property is going to be max height, because that's what I want to transition. And I want it to transition over 1 second. Okay? That's probably one of the simplest transitions you can do. So let's see if that did anything. No, that did not do anything. All right. Notice that it's not making the the background is still not appearing. This saddle, I mean, it's not appearing anymore because I still got this display none. So this UL is not displaying. Let me see if I take the display off, because now that I got the transition, I might not need that display yet anymore. Okay. And it's still not displaying when it's open. And I've got display block. I don't want to change the display. I actually want it to, I'm sorry, I actually want it to display all the time. That's right. Okay. Because I want it to display even when it's not there, because it'll have a max height of 0. So it will actually, that will keep you from seeing it. So I want it to, I'll just put display block. I mean, it should already be displaying block, right? Because a UL element, has display block by default. So let me see if I can work with this. Okay, so I'm just going to assume the display is display block and see if this works. So when I'm hovering over the menu container, anywhere in the menu container, I want to set the max height to like 10 EM. Okay, so let's see what happens. Yeah, that's, I mean, it doesn't look like it's working, but it's working, because when I move over this button now, the unordered list element, which is that saddle brown color, is appearing between these gaps. Remember, these are the list items that are sitting on top of the UL. But obviously, I don't want these list items to show up, right? And remain there, because that's what they're doing now. They are remaining there. I want them to just show up when the underlying unordered list, that the menu panel shows up. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to give the menu panel an overflow of hidden. And what that's going to do is any elements inside of that menu panel, okay, if they overflow the menu panel itself, like they're doing now, because the menu panel has a max height of 0, they will be hidden. Okay, and that's exactly what I want. I could also just say overflow Y is hidden, because they're only showing up because they're overflowing in the Y direction. But watch when I hover over now. Oops, okay, I gotta look at that. And when I hover off, it just looks like it's going back into the button, which is a very cool effect. Now, probably what I would do here is I would probably, if I'm going to do this, I mean, this looks fine, but I might want to make the button and the menu the same width. Now, remember, buttons are inline elements by default. I mean, browsers, may make them inline blocks. But, well, let's see what I can do. Actually, let me see what I can do with that. I've got the width of the menu container, 8 EM. And let's say I wanted this button to take up the whole width. Now, if Chrome is rendering this as an inline block, I should be able to set the width of that button to 100%, and that will take up the whole thing. So let me see if that will work. Dodger Blue, and I'm going to say width 100%. And there it goes. Okay, so it is treating this as an inline block because I can adjust the width. And now when I hover, that really looks like it's rolling out of there. Now, what about for this UL element? This doesn't look like it's taking up the whole width of the menu container. So Can I change that? Let me... I mean, I should be able to because this is a block element, so I should be able to set the width on that. And boom. Okay, that looks good to me now. Although, you know, I'm debating whether I want this text to be centered or whatever. But that looks good. So you can see that now the menu's taking up the entire width and the button takes up the entire width of the menu container. And that's a nice transition. Okay, I'm going to call that a success. This is Dr. K, and I will see you in the next video.